In the summer of 2007, Quinton Jackson, known as Rampage, stood in the center of the octagon at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, with a championship belt around his waist and the entire sport at his feet. He was loud, he was funny, he wore a heavy chain like a pro wrestler, and he could end a man's night with a single punch. He was one of the biggest stars combat sports had ever produced. Nearly 20 years later, the man they call Rampage is turning 48, and the story of where he is today is nothing like the one anyone would have written for him back then. To understand how he got here, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Quinton Ramon Jackson was born on June 20th, 1978, in Memphis, Tennessee. He grew up rough in a city that did not hand out many easy paths, and he found his first real direction on a wrestling mat at Raleigh, Egypt High School. Wrestling gave him discipline and a sense of what his body could do under pressure, and it planted the seed for everything that came later. He was a big, powerful kid with a chip on his shoulder and a personality that filled a room, and those two things, the power and the personality, would define the rest of his life. His professional fighting career did not start in America. It started across the ocean, in Japan, inside the Pride Fighting Championships. In the early 2000s, Pride was the biggest spectacle in mixed martial arts, packing tens of thousands of fans into arenas for events that felt more like rock concerts than sporting events. And in that environment, Rampage Jackson became a sensation. He fought with a wild, aggressive style built around devastating power, but what truly set him apart were the slams. He would scoop opponents off the mat, lift them high into the air, drive them into the canvas with a violence that left crowds gasping. His slam knockout of Ricardo Arona, which happened on his own birthday in 2004, is still considered one of the most iconic images the sport has ever produced. It was in Pride that he first crossed paths with Chuck Liddell, the man who would become his great rival. In late 2003, inside a Pride tournament, Jackson got the better of Liddell, forcing his corner to surrender on his behalf. That same tournament also gave Jackson one of the most painful nights of his career, when Wanderlei Silva caught him with a brutal series of knees and stopped him in the final. The rivalry with Silva would burn for years, and the rivalry with Liddell was only just getting started. By 2007, the landscape had changed. Pride was fading, the UFC was rising, and Jackson made the jump to the biggest promotion in the world. He earned a title shot almost immediately, and it set up a rematch the entire sport wanted to see. Chuck Liddell was the reigning UFC light heavyweight champion, riding one of the most dominant runs the division had ever witnessed, and he wanted revenge for that loss in Japan. At UFC 71 on May 26, 2007, Jackson gave him no chance to get it. About 90 seconds into the fight, Rampage landed a short, perfect punch, dropped Liddell, and finished him on the ground. In under 2 minutes, the most feared champion in the sport was unconscious, and Quinton Jackson was the king of the light heavyweight division. He was not done. A few months later, at UFC 75, he faced Dan Henderson in a fight that carried enormous historical weight, because Henderson held the old Pride middleweight belt. Jackson won a unanimous decision and unified the two championships, becoming the man who tied together the two great eras of the sport. At that exact moment, in the fall of 2007, you could make a real argument that Rampage Jackson was the most famous fighter on the planet. But staying on top in this sport is almost impossible, and the cracks came quickly. At UFC 86, he lost his title to Forrest Griffin in a close and controversial decision that still gets argued about today. He bounced back with wins, including a heated grudge match tied to his time coaching a season of The Ultimate Fighter opposite Rashad Evans. That coaching stint, and the trash talk that came with it, proved he was as valuable in front of a camera as he was inside the cage. And that camera was about to pull him in a completely different direction. In 2010, Hollywood came calling, and Jackson was cast as B.A. Baracus, the role originally made famous by Mr. T in the big-budget film adaptation of The A-Team. He actually delayed a fight to take the part. For a while, it looked like the fighting might become secondary, that Rampage Jackson was going to reinvent himself as an action movie star. He took other acting and television roles, leaned hard into his natural charisma, and seemed genuinely torn between two very different careers. He kept fighting, though, and in 2011 he stepped into the cage at UFC 135 against a young, terrifying new champion named John Jones. Jones submitted him, and it was a quiet signal that the sport had moved into a new generation. Jackson eventually left the UFC over business disagreements. He signed with Bellator and reminded everyone he still had something left when he won a light heavyweight tournament there in 2014. But the great runs were behind him now. The body that once threw grown men into the air had absorbed thousands of strikes across 2 decades, and time does not negotiate with anyone. His final fight told the whole story. On December 29, 2019, back in Japan where it all began, Jackson stepped into the cage at heavyweight against the legendary Fedor Emelianenko. He came in visibly out of shape, a shadow of the explosive athlete he had been, and Fedor stopped him in the first round. It was Jackson's first knockout loss in 14 years, and it had the unmistakable feel of a final chapter. Interestingly, Jackson has always insisted he never officially retired. He has talked openly about wanting to fight again, even alongside his son. But the truth is, he has not competed since that night, the longest break of his entire career. So that brings us to the man at 48, and this is where his life took a turn almost nobody saw coming. Because the most dramatic and painful story of Rampage Jackson's life in recent years is not about him at all. It is about his son. In August of 2025, Jackson's son Raja, himself a young mixed martial artist, attended a small independent professional wrestling event in Los Angeles run by an outfit called KnockX Pro. What was supposed to be a planned moment, a scripted spot between Raja and a veteran wrestler named Stuart Smith, who performed under the name Psycho Stu, went horrifically wrong. Raja climbed into the ring, picked Smith up, and slammed him hard to the mat. Smith appeared to be knocked unconscious on impact. And then, while the entire thing was being live-streamed online, Raja delivered roughly 20 full-force punches to his head before other wrestlers finally pulled him away. Stuart Smith was hospitalized with serious injuries, including fractures to his jaw and face and the loss of several teeth. He is a military veteran who, by his own account, had taken up wrestling as a way to cope with post-traumatic stress after his service. The footage spread across the internet within hours and drew condemnation from across the wrestling and fighting world. WWE cut its ties with the promotion. The Los Angeles Police Department opened an investigation, and the name Jackson was suddenly in headlines again, but for all the wrong reasons. For Rampage, it became the hardest situation a father can face, playing out in public. His statements in the aftermath were conflicting and clearly anguished. At times, he defended his son and tried to clear up what he called misinformation. At other times, he expressed deep concern for Smith's well-being. Remarkably, at one point, the elder Jackson said publicly that he believed his son should serve jail time and do community service for what he had done. This was a father caught between loving his child and acknowledging that something terrible and indefensible had happened. The legal process moved forward through late 2025. Raja was arrested and charged with felony battery causing great bodily injury, along with a misdemeanor count, facing the possibility of years behind bars. Eventually, he reached a resolution, pleading no contest to the felony charge. Under the agreement, he is set to serve a short county jail sentence, pay restitution of more than $80,000 to Stuart Smith, and complete 2 years of probation, with sentencing scheduled for the summer of 2026. So this is the life of Rampage Jackson as he turns 48. A man who once unified championships and stood as the biggest star in his sport now spends his days as a retired fighter and a father navigating the consequences of his son's actions and the long shadow they cast. He is a UFC Hall of Famer, secure in his legacy. His net worth is estimated at several $million. He still talks about fighting, still dips into acting, streaming, and public appearances. And he still carries that same booming personality that made him a star. But the fierce, untouchable young champion who knocked out Chuck Liddell in 90 seconds feels like a figure from a different lifetime. The truth about Rampage Jackson at 48 is that the biggest battles of his life are no longer the ones inside a cage. They are the quieter, harder ones that come with age, with fame fading, and with watching your own child face a reckoning you cannot fight for them. For a man who built his entire identity on power and control, that may be the toughest fight of all. And it is a reminder that even the loudest, most invincible stars eventually have to live a life that no highlight reel ever prepared them for.